Now let's introduce the speakers that we have today. Vasily, would you please reintroduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Vasily Panopoulos, Head of Demand Generation at Kenna Security, based in San Francisco.
Good afternoon, all. Mark Eggleston. I am the Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer at Health Partners Plans. We are a regional HMO in Philadelphia, and looking forward to answering some questions here today. Thank you.
So a little comment about Mark. So he's not a marketer, as he just introduced himself. Mark has been a frequent speaker at BDI events. In fact, he is a very sought after speaker at a lot of different industry events, especially in the security space. And one of the cool things about today is that it's important to get the voice of the speaker, the voice of the panelists in terms of what makes virtual events successful. So we'll really lean on Mark to give us that and to share his experiences from working with lots of different types of events, lots of formats, lots of different organizers. So we'll call on Mark to do that as we make progress. Zarina.
Zarina Stanford. I'm the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer here at Rackspace Technology. And first of all, thank you for a number of you who are actually our customers. And my heritage, I had many years at IBM, at SAP, at a startup, as well as here at Rackspace. And I am equally eager to kind of share the conversation and learn from everybody as well.
My name's Lisa Skinner. I am a product marketing manager at GE Digital in the grid business, based in Boston, Massachusetts, and very much echo what Zarina just said around very much, looking forward to hearing what you all have to say as well in the exchange, the Q&A session, and the networking as well. So happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Latany Conant, Chief Market Officer at Sixth Sense. And as I said in my breakout, my mother-in-law always thought I was an overpaid party planner, but I think that's just because I'm a field marketer at heart. And so excited to talk about the intersection of field marketing and account-based experiences, and also the evolution of the role of a field marketer.
So let's get right into it. The focus of the event is overcoming the challenges of virtual events. So we're about a year into this, as we all know. From our own perspective, prior to March 2020, BDI only did live in-person events for 19 years. So when March 2020 hit, we were forced to pivot along with the rest of the world and to very quickly figure out how we do our business virtually, digitally. And it was a huge lift. And I think we all kind of pivoted together, the whole field marketing, the whole B2B community. We all sort of learned this together. And over the last year or so, we did about 125 of these virtual events. I know everyone here in this room on this panel has done a lot. What would you say your biggest challenges are now that we're a year into this with virtual events? Let's identify the problem. And I will start with Vasily, and we can just go through everyone at this point with this particular question.
For me, what I find in the virtual event space, at least one of the biggest challenges that we face, is how to really foster those relationships virtually, right? It's very difficult to do that in a virtual space versus a physical event. So I would say that is sort of our primary challenge, is how to build and foster those relationships virtually.
I would agree with you. One of my favorite topics. Who else would like to share some challenges? Mark, from your perspective, what would you say
Sure.
out of all the events that you participate in, what are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, as I was listening to your intro, Steve, part of my role is also business continuity and resilience. So, flash back a year ago today, and we were like, I think this whole pandemic thing might cause schools to close, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody's kind of like, well, I don't know about that. So we continue had to go into resiliency mode. In doing so, my meetings just got exploded. We remain work from home now. We're going to continue to support a bimodal workplace, but what does that mean to my calendar? It means my calendar has been wreaked havoc upon. I get, it's pretty usual for people to take 2 to 3 of my lunch times a week, because that is the only time that's not marked as busy. My calendar has somewhere between anywhere from a low to 7 meetings a day to as much as 15 or 17 meetings a day. So for me to avoid Zoom fatigue, I have to schedule it in like everything else. So And I think it's hard as an event producer because everybody's, preferences here are going to be a little separate or a little different. For me, I love to have these times before 9 o'clock, before my meeting deluge starts. I like to start at around 4:35 when I might crack open a cold beverage, or I'm more in, okay, let's get into more participatory things and not just trying to, lead a meeting, so I can be a little bit more engaged. So, I think finding the magic hour is certainly helpful. And, the Zoom fatigue is certainly real. When we had our team started with working from home, we were doing those pretty frequently, but it didn't take long for Zoom fatigue to fit back in. But I'll tell you what, last Friday was apparently from our HR department, it was Employee Appreciation Day. I don't know if anybody else knew that last Friday. So we were encouraged to do Zoom meetings again. And it was nice because it had been so long since we had those scheduled. But, I think you have to take these things and do them in a little bit smaller increments. I love doing Skype drive-bys with my team. And I'll say, hey, can you talk? And it's like, well, yeah, sure. And like, oh crap, what does Mark want to talk to me about? And I'm just like, hey, how was your weekend? Okay, that's it. It's basically taking the virtual equivalent to what we used to do in the elevator when we were in the office and just trying to get those little snippets in, because that's what helps people know that you care about them and you're just interested in some of the small talk. So hopefully we can talk some more strategies too.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. All good stuff. Zarina.
To jump in on that one, I totally agree with pretty much everything that you said, Mark. I think if I could comment on two parts. One is being the participant or recipient of a lot of these invites and Zoom meetings. And the question for me would be to say, how do we maximize, the time that we have together? What I do love, and thinking of the positive side, is what Zoom and all these forums have done is to really democratize everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it doesn't matter what your level, what your layer, when we're on a meeting, it's a meeting and it'll all come together. And to that extent, there is also the other side that we're so quick into let's get things done. You kind of forgotten about the social, the human side. Right. Mark, I do the same thing, and we use Teams. We just kind of ping on Slack and say, hey, how are you doing? And just something little like that makes a huge difference. So that's as a participant. I, in my role, also, work with the regions, and in some cases, I would even drive some of these engagement virtual sessions. And for us in this community in particular, is that how do you stand out among 100,000 or maybe hundreds of thousands of events and invites that everybody's going to be bombarded to? So really home back to the number one job that we have to do in everything, every role that we do, is to say, how do you become relevant? And how do you seize that attention? What is that one thing that makes your venue or your invite or your particular connect matter? So I think that those are all the challenges that we face, and as well as a great opportunity. Now, earlier today I did a podcast and someone was in India, it's like we're all together, right? This has been the perfect storm in a sense, in a positive light.
How do you stand out? How do you differentiate from all the other things out there is definitely a fun topic that we'll certainly get into, Zarina. So thank you for sharing that. Lisa.
Yeah, I would echo what Zarina said. In fact, I took some notes when you were asking the question. And I definitely think it's about how do you rise above the noise and position yourself as unique and different. And I think it comes down to, I would say two things in response to that. One is, content continues to be king. Like, I really do think that we have to be really thoughtful around, what is the topic? How do we position the takeaways, if you will? How do we make sure that we are tying those tightly to the target personas? Like, some of the, I guess what I would say here is some of those things that are very foundational, and as marketers, whether you're sitting in the field or you're leading events or demand gen, I think we have to make sure that we're focusing in on those basics that maybe when we were pre-COVID, you could maybe afford to run a little fast and loose from time to time. And I think we just have to always make sure we put that customer hat on and are really thinking through, especially if we're talking about engaging prospects, like making sure we have customers that are telling our story, and that it's not, not only the content, but the format and how we're telling that story. So not just a talking head, but having, fireside chats, having customers speak on our behalf. I think there's just a lot more thought that has to go into making sure that we're differentiated and we rise above the fray, if you will.
Great solutions there, Lisa, that we should definitely spend some time digging into among the whole group. So thank you for that. Latani?
So echoing what I think a lot of people have said, but maybe a little different spin on how I think about it. But, you know, in my role is really about three things: our market, our brand, which I tie to the experiences we create, and revenue. And so when I think about an event, physical or whatever the medium is, it's the ultimate expression of our brand. And I'm extremely particular, so I've been told, about how these details come together. And so, you know, what I think about, and, you know, I love design. I love great design. And when you walk into a room that's designed really well, the same thing as when you walk into a great event, it really should evoke almost all your senses. You know, your smell, your hearing. So we were listening to music earlier, your emotion, that, you know, tactile. And so how are we able to really bring all of those senses together and create, you know, something amazing in a digital world? And that's the challenge. But I think it's actually possible. And I feel like it's the challenge and also the opportunity. And if done well, like, you really can differentiate, because so many people are relatively lazy about putting people through another webinar. And that kind of feeds into the next challenge, which I think is, again, an opportunity, and is the evolution of the role of the field marketer, which I think can evolve from this as a real superhero because you understand experiences, and it's just a different mode, and you understand logistics and details are what matter. They're what separate a great experience from just an okay one. And I think field marketers are great at really pulling together all of those little details to make an amazing experience. So how do you start to bring that to the digital world, pre, during, and post, and start to orchestrate these experiences? So anyway, I'm actually quite bullish on the whole thing, but that's just one woman's opinion.
Thank you, Latani. Those are really good stuff that we will certainly cover. Let me go back to Vasily's challenge, which is how to foster relationships virtually. So just from our experience, as I mentioned, as you know, we used to do these face-to-face. So we would be in a really nice 4-star restaurant for lunch. We'd have 5 roundtables of 8 people. We'd have maybe 1 sales rep, maybe even a customer, 6 prospects at each table. People were breaking bread with each other. They were shaking hands, exchanging business cards, enjoying a meal together. And that was a pretty natural way where, especially...
I'm just sad now, by the way. Thanks, Stephen.
This is what we have. Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to bring you down, Mark, but this is something to look forward to when we come back. So my point here is that it was a very conducive environment for what? For both marketing and sales to come together to build relationships with, say, new prospects. So now we try and do that virtually, okay? So who would like to submit some solutions on how you do that virtually? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what's missing that you would love to have? So it could be any combination of those 3 things. And I'll just let anyone who wants to react first sort of jump in, instead of just calling everyone in order.
I have kind of an interesting silver lining that I think learned from, that I can share. So I think we have to keep in mind that while the medium has changed, people have a need to connect. And I mean, we all have a need as humans to connect. And in the jobs that we're in, depending, you know, each one of us are in high stake jobs and need help. And so what has emerged for us as probably one of the most successful things we've done is built a community. And I know that sounds, oh, everyone wants to go and build a community, but actually what ended up happening was we had a physical event that a year ago, I was in DC, like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be going to Boston and what the hell do we do? Freaking out. And we were like, well, I guess we'll just do it. We'll send them Uber Eats for breakfast. Like, let's figure this out. And we ended up pressing on. but we kept it small. We didn't say we're going to invite the whole country. We said, no, it's going to be CMOs still in New York, but that little bespoke community. And rather than us talk about what we want to talk about, we're going to let the audience be like, COVID, what are we doing? And they loved it so much that we said, well, let's do it again, and let's do it again, and let's do it again. And now, a year later, we haven't missed a Friday 2 times. 600 plus CMOs come in and out to gather and talk about the most relevant stuff. And it has nothing to do with 6 Sense, right? But we've let them be the audience and just created the room. Like you described this amazing room with steak and warm bread, and I'm really hungry right now. So like, we have to create the room and make sure it's a great room to allow the audience to gather. And the rooms might just look and feel a little different. Slack is a great new room where stuff is going down in these Slack channels. So how do you curate and be a part of those? And it doesn't have to be your community. You can also participate in others. But I think that's going to be a big way of the future. That's how people are learning and growing and connecting.
Yeah, I have to comment, Latane, what you struck when you said your 3 objectives. I think one of your objectives, and it comes clear in how you're speaking now, is to create an experience, right? So having attended hundreds, if not thousands of these type of events, I will say, and Steve, you carry this too, as I've benefited and been in the room at one of your dinners, it really comes down, don't skimp on your moderator, right? Your moderator should be the type of person that is an incredibly socially attractive person. They know how to engage people, be bright. They know about smiling on these things. It's simple stuff. Don't underestimate those simple things and really drawing out your audience. I mean, back to my calendar and whatnot, if I get on one of these conferences and I've got somebody who's talking like this, and they're talking like this from the camera, they're clearly not skilled in these type of things, it's hard for me to continue with my attention. I wish I wasn't built and wired this way. I'm sure my profession has done untold damage to my attention spans with a little ADHD spiced in on that. But if you don't keep engaging me in 30, 60-second intervals, I'm out. I wish it was different. So I think they really, really have to do some more of that. I think other ways of drawing out interaction too is setting some ground rules. I love it when someone says, this is Chatham House rules. I want to hear what you guys are talking about, and learn from each other. I really, really, really enjoy peer networking too. I like to hear from thought leaders in my position in private or public companies, not necessarily the vendors themselves. And I don't mean that in a disrespect. It's just really where we thrive when we learn from each other that are in our positions. It's really an empathetic approach. So if you're able to emulate that somehow as a vendor, my hat's off to you as well. I think also a good vendor knows when to stop talking too. If there's a moderator that is saying consuming 60 to 70% of the conversation, that's probably not something I want to jump in on, because I'm not having a chance to just talk and get my questions out there. So I don't know, there's a ton of different things here to do, but Latane, you summed it up by talking about an experience.
I would definitely echo that. To me, it's really about sort of that experience and providing that value, right? At the end of the day, everybody's being bombarded by webinars, you name it, and their time is so limited. So how can we as a company be of service or of value to others, right? So in our company, pre-COVID, we used to do these workshops around the country and in Europe, where it was really a workshop focused on educating and providing best practices on how to improve security best practices at a company. It could have literally had any of our competitors' logos in that workshop, and it worked beautifully. But we were of service. And what we found by doing these workshops, that people would come knocking on our door 2 weeks later, a month later, and say, hey, I want to learn about you guys. COVID hit, we took it online, and we've developed a on-demand 1-hour version of that. But also, what is a really cool aspect of that is we also offer continuing education credits as well. So again, adding another value add on top of that, if you will.
I agree with everything that was said. And just to add on top of that, I think that one of the things that we shouldn't underscore on or shouldn't forget about is the power of our own employees. It's the employee base who are the absolute best advocates And in our case, all 7,000 of us records, like, you know, if we just make one connection or one authentic connection and interaction, it could reach to 1.4 million people. And it's just that authentic, that instant, and that real time. And I love everybody highlighted, you know, especially on the point about being interactive, peer to peer, as well as I think we are in the world of co-creating today. And everybody wants to love to be a part of it because you have, you know, you have a little skin in the game as both sides, both giving as well as taking. I think that's what has been really, really powerful in these moments, the last year for that matter. Spanning from, I love the community thought as well too. So we also do active getting together of peers. And you could actually even subsect them to say, okay, if this is this groups of peers and that and the likes. And that has been really, really powerful for us as well. And lastly, I would say it all goes back to really marketing one-on-one as being relevant. And therefore, we got to figure out who we are trying to be relevant on that particular conversation. So I told the team is that I don't really measure quantity, I measure more on quality. And it is all the way from brand advocates to demand to, you know, to influencers, as well as the culture elements of it as well too. And it's really powerful. I mean, in our brand, we don't need to reach to 100 million people, but if there are 5,000 businesses whom we can really engage with and in a very relevant fashion, and in the different groups of the different parts of the business, that makes us, you know, their partner.
One thing I would say, just to add on that, on top of that, is, you know, this idea of making sure that you're creating an experience that, you know, we talked about this relevancy and this idea of content is king. And I think this transformation of the field marketer, I think that one of the things, and this idea of quality over quantity, one of the things that I know we struggled with, and I didn't tell everyone that I'm on day 8 at GE Digital. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to here is speaking to my experience, you know, most recently at Zebra Technologies. But one of the things that I think we struggled with is this pivot from, you know, in person to virtual with a team that, you know, is really skilled at in person, right? And this idea of, and again, I can't recall who mentioned it. I think it was Latane, around this idea that details really matter. And I think details matter. I mean, I would suggest that my experience tells me that details matter, at least in today's day and age, just so much more these days in these virtual platforms. And I say that not that they don't matter in in-person events, but I also think that you know, having a team that has to pivot and learn how to move from in-person to virtual and have to manage all of these details and dealing with potentially stakeholders that think that you just, you know, snap your fingers and you know, it must be so easy just to stand up a virtual event. You know, you just get a platform, and really managing those expectations with stakeholders. I think the other pressure, and in my networking session prior to coming to the main stage here, someone mentioned the fact that, you know, so much increased pressure on pipeline because there was so much of a dependency on in-person events driving lead flow and pipeline, that, you know, you've got this pressure to just do more for the sake of doing more, because it must just be like in-person events. If we do more, then we're going to get more leads and more pipeline. And I would suggest to you that, you know, my experience tells me that that's not necessarily the case, and really to take a step back and maybe push back a little bit and really, you know, think about the quality versus the quantity, and make sure you're educating your key stakeholders on, you know, it's not as easy as just snapping your fingers, and you have a skill set and maybe a skill gap on your team because you have folks that are much more equipped at doing in-person than virtual. So I just, you know, wanted to echo the fact that for me, quality is really the important metric here, and not necessarily quantity when you're looking to help, you know, support pipeline and brand as well.
When it comes to preparing your team to be successful in a virtual environment, I find that that's often an underrated factor. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So obviously, when it comes to field marketing, you're supporting your sales organization. And for any successful event that has prospects and customers, obviously you want the participation of your sales and accounts team. You want them to be engaging. You want them to be, have the opportunity to build relationships, which was the whole point of this topic, how to foster relationships virtually. But the world of doing that, the skills to do that are different than they are in face-to-face. We work with about 35 different clients. They're all enterprise tech companies, and they all have different types of representation on their sales teams, old, young, all different, diverse backgrounds. The bottom line is that you have to invest in properly preparing these people so that they know what to expect, they know how to behave, they know what their role is, and even practice with them in terms of how do you work a virtual room? How do you work a virtual roundtable? You were very comfortable when it was, lunch for 8 people because everyone was face to face. But when you're doing that and you've got 8 boxes now, and that you've got this opportunity because your field marketer did such an incredible job of making sure that your target accounts actually showed up. And these are people that, you are focused on, that you want to meet, that you have identified to be good potential customers. You've got that opportunity and you've got 15 minutes in the room. How are you behaving? How well are you prepared? All those questions I find often are not addressed to the extent they should be, given all the time, effort, and preparation that everyone makes for these events.
Steve, I'm curious too, or to the group, what do you all think of secret shoppers or strategically planting existing customers in these discussions? I've been approached by vendors like, hey, we're having this steak or having this thing. If you could come, I won't ask you to say anything you're not comfortable with, but it really helps, back to my earlier point of, people in the position selling to each other. I mean, that's how I typically acquire new products or technology is, I learned through my peer network which vendors I really like and which vendors I don't really want to learn much about, unfortunately. But
Sure.
Having a peer in the room to help broker that discussion and to help give an honest and sincere comment about it, I think can really pay huge dividends too.
It was interesting. Someone I think earlier said, what's the ROI from wine tastings and various things? And for me, like, if any of that is geared towards our customers, the ROI is gold, because those are our customers. And, we need to be connecting with them. And to your point, Mark, whether it's a hosted event where we've brought you to help, or you're just out, again, these communities are where this stuff's happening.
Right.
And so, I just got a call. Oh yeah, we talked about you on some other thing that wasn't even a 6 Sense thing. It's like, that is the gold.
I couldn't agree with you more. I personally seek out those events because there's no vendor tax. I won't have to give an hour of my time afterwards listening to a spiel because you already had me. We're already married. There's no need for us to date.
So let's just have fun.
Exactly. I love that approach. I really, really do. And it's great.
My question would be, why make it secret? I think it's actually, there's now a big movement and real business being had for customers who are actually on a almost like a retainer basis, but you don't want to make it too all out, because then you appear to be biased and buying it. But I think I go back to the peer-to-peer. That's also where we have the most success when it comes to the ultimate success, whether you're measuring for revenue or bookings, what have you, or just retaining or retention. I just think it's a great deal. And we absolutely showcase that to say, hey, you know what, don't just hear it from us, hear it from your own peers. And sometimes we actually would go out of the room and just really be truly as authentic and as unorchestrated as you can, other than that you have placed them together.
I would agree, Zarina. And I would also add that, we're talking about virtual events here. So we probably need to do some pre-solicitation in the virtual world. So what I've seen also helps these events. People are saying, why aren't people coming? There should be so much buzz on LinkedIn a week before your event. And these other peers are jumping in or to come to your event. We're eager to come to it, because that's where folks like me pick up their most stuff. I mean, I kind of abhor Facebook, but I do love LinkedIn as a necessary evil. It's the virtual resume of the last decade. You got to be out there and engage on it. So that's where I get a lot of my information about these events, and I pick it up from my peers.
So let's continue to share creative solutions, vendors, technology, that have been part of what makes things work for you in your organization. It could be polling tools. It could be a platform that you've used. It could just be a vendor. I know I saw someone sharing some virtual cooking stuff in the chat, that type of stuff. Let's share some actual solutions with each other that have worked for you.
I love Welcome, the platform Welcome. It's a miracle that we found them, because I think they had like 5 people when we found them. But I mean, I was halfway through planning a huge event. The event was on Friday and it was Wednesday. And the platform that we picked, I was like, you couldn't DM people. It was just so bad. And I was like, there's no way, we have to find something better. And so in like 2 days, we transitioned to Welcome. And now we've been using it a lot. And it's just, again, you can do a lot of great branding. There's just a lot you can do with it to make it have a lot of the perks of Zoom, but not just feel like another Zoom. Like it feels special, which is big for me. You can do all kinds of stuff like videos and music and special forums and ways to get people meeting up. And the thing with these event platforms is like, it's this new category that is exploding. I wish I was like had enough money to just be a VC and invest in them. So there's tons of little ones popping up, and I don't know if in 6 months Welcome will still be the best one, but for right now, what we found is they're very good.
For us, it really sort of depends, right? Because there's the events that we do in-house, right? So I agree with Latany. So Welcome, we use On24, and then Zoom again, depending on the type of event, right? Whether it's like a roundtable 4 or 5 person discussion versus a 50, 75, 100 person event. And then there's the third party vendors out there, the organizations that we partner with that use, companies from Event Farm to Engages and what have you. So there's a whole sort of spectrum here. And what I've seen is, I think in the last 5 or 6 months, there's been, to Latany's point, a better selection, if you will. But prior to COVID, there was no really need for virtual because everybody was doing physical. So there's a lot of catch up that's happening in the event virtual space from a platform perspective that I feel still needs to happen.
I also want to add one more perspective here, is that events, virtual or otherwise, is a big part of the reach. But I think that we shouldn't just focus on one thing. This whole omni-channel experience, the whole omni experience is really important, and always be there when they less suspect, for that matter, from your prospect or customer's perspective, is equally important. It isn't just, us creating a waterhole for people to go to. It's also being in their waterhole. And I think that will give the multiplier to what we are doing, so that it's just not one thing, but also, most importantly, to be where they want to be. And I think that's the power of piecing all these pieces and puzzles together. And speaking of puzzles together, back to the earlier conversation, our remit is number one, from all the way from brand to demand to advocacy, as well as to culture. So those are what I call our growth multipliers. And if you can intersect them and integrate and really draw them home, it's amazing what I think as marketers that we could do. And as individuals, whether it's in the field or in corporate.
Thank you, Zarina. Wanted to see if any of the attendees would like to ask a question live. I know there's been a lot of good stuff in the chat. You could repeat one of those, or just feel free to comment or ask a question. Let me pivot to the audience.
I'm curious about the size and the length of events and kind of how you guys are thinking about that. Part of this is, and you've touched on this a little bit, how do you think about the sort of live interactive events that you're doing versus things that are a little bit more asynchronous, right? Because obviously when we do these events, a lot of people now are hoping that it will be recorded because things change. They can't end up being at this. It's a little different when it's on Zoom versus in person.
Yeah, how has the format changed?
I think it really depends on like the business objective and the type of the event. So that's why it's kind of a little bit of a hard question to answer. I mean, I think an all day, you know, what we found is about 3/4 of a day is about all people can handle if it's like an event. And we've also had to cut, you know, our breakthrough conference was 3 days. I think we did like a day and a half, you know, so we've had to really cut it down just to think about like, there's only so much time people can be in front of a computer. But again, I think it just totally depends on the type in terms of the timing and those type of things. You know, you have to always think, okay, if this were me, or if this were what I want to like, you know, would this time be a normal time for me? Like kind of back to your Mark, the schedule, like if you want to catch a C-suite person, like when is their schedule going to be so it's those same thought processes again that we did before, right? Just applying it to a different medium.
The virtual timeframe is definitely should be shorter than face-to-face. Because you don't have that opportunity to have a physical experience. You know, the ability to change rooms, the ability to go to a sponsor exhibit, you know, go to a lunch, to go to an outside venue, to have a cocktail reception. When you're trying to do everything virtually, you know, for example, a good friend of mine is a CIO at New York Life, and we were talking about virtual events. Similar to you, Mark, he gets invited to to participate and to speak at multiple things. And, you know, he said, the one thing I wish the event organizers would do is that they reduce the expectation and don't pretend that I'm going to participate and pay attention for the whole day, because I never do. There will be that 1 or 2 or 3 sessions that I'm really interested in. Obviously, the one that I'm speaking at, you know, I'm going to, you know, participate in. But as an attendee, you're not going to get me 100% all day virtually. You're just not. And anyone that I know that's in a similar position is the same thing. So let's all stop pretending that our registrants are going to be showing up all day long when in fact they're not. And let's be really honest about it and say, hey, look, the program might be running all day. We would love to have your complete undivided attention on the topics that really interest you. And let's work together to maximize the value there. But let's not just pretend and expect that someone's going to be tuned in at a C-level, especially for, you know, more than a fraction of an entire day.
I gave a keynote not too long ago for a secure world, and they have one of those nice immersive platforms. But the nice thing about it is my presentation was pre-recorded. And, you know, you might think that took away from the interactional component of it, but it really didn't, because how I was interacting is we had a chat log that was just going nonstop the whole time during the presentation. So while recorded me was talking in person, I was able to address a plethora of questions real time. So having that level, you know, of thought into it beforehand, how can we still make this interactive? Sometimes the inverse is true. Recorded something, it's highly interactive because your presenter is able to engage real time with your real time audience.
We used to all do physical events. Our personas, you know, we target C-suite executives. They don't go to all the sessions. They're there to network, to specifically meet with people and leave. It's no different in the virtual world. So, you know, it's finding that way. And how do we reach those people? Again, whether it's a 2-hour, 3-hour event, a virtual event, we only have like 2 minutes to find them, and how do we get to them is the main thing. So it's really no different virtual or physical. It's the same.
I don't know if it totally is. And I guess here's my take on the big shows where it's like a recorded presentation, and then another recorded presentation, another recording presentation. What I've seen play out as a sponsor, but also, you know, doing those, is you almost have to think about it more as a piece of content and like a content marketer. And, you know, and so when I think about, for example, sponsoring like a Gartner show, I want to know, well, what are you going to do after it? How are you going to, like, I'm thinking, how many impressions am I going to get versus how many people are going to come to this session, just sort of knowing that they're not. And then the same thing goes, again, this is why I think the evolution of the role is so critical, is you also have to now think of yourself as a content marketer, because we're going to invest a lot in this virtual event. how am I going to create social tiles or little blog books or this or that to really, because not as many people are going to be in the quote unquote room in real time. So it's an interesting new dynamic, I think, for what you do with the sessions post.
I would also add to that and say, not only as a content marketer, but also thinking about it as from a demand gen perspective, right? It's about, how do you package this up in a way that allows LinkedIn or other channels that you're programmatic, whatever channels you're using to drive demand, really from an ROI perspective. I mean, I totally get that there's a brand component to everything we're doing here, but I think, taking a step back and saying, okay, what are the snackable bits that I could make from this post show, and how do I leverage that across my channels? I think it's not only content, but it's also putting your demand gen hat on and thinking about how do you bring this to life post show.
And along the same lines, from content is virtual is easier to execute and implement an account-based marketing strategy for one major reason. There's no geography limitation. So we all know in the world of live events and in-person events, when we had account-based marketing lists, that we would have to think about that from a regional perspective. When we're going to a certain city, how many of those people that are target accounts can you get to show up at that city? Well, guess what? With virtual, you don't have that boundary anymore. So you can go really specific to Lisa, to your original point, which is content is king. You can go really specific into content, whether that's an industry focus or whether that's a niche topic that is not going to be everywhere, that is producing events, and that you can own that topic. Virtual gives you those advantages that you didn't have before. So I would say when it comes to content specificity and relevancy, you've got an advantage, number one. And then also your ability to really focus in on those accounts that are going to be most likely to convert to a new customer, or to even focus on your existing customers from an account-based marketing perspective, because you don't have to worry about geography.
I do agree on that. However, one thing as far as when we do talk about region, right? So we do these CISO executive roundtables across the country, and we do them in specific key areas. And it's basically a peer-to-peer 1.5 hour sort of networking where there's a topic that's chosen, again, not about us, about the industry, and the community of CISOs in a specific town. A lot of them don't know each other. So it is actually relevant to some degree to have that in-region presence, if you will, at the same time.
We really do both. Again, it goes back to what segment are we trying to be relevant to, and then how do they act, and how do they behave, and how do they prefer to be communicated?
We're a startup, so we're still kind of in our growing stages as a company, right? So we don't necessarily have that global footprint. It's primarily North America and some in EMEA. That being said, we have a target list of certain amount of companies that we're going after, right? And the majority of them happen to be in North America and in specific cities. So, and again, looking at it more from an ABM standpoint, that's sort of how we approach it is, let's not, cast the wider net, let's hone in specifically on, for instance, New York. And just like a lot of us, probably a lot of our target personas and accounts live in the New York metro, Chicago, LA, Bay Area. It's kind of no different for us, is that we do focus in region because it's a lot easier for us to develop sort of that community and to really create sort of our brand awareness in those regions where our target accounts are based, if you will.
I have a question. When are you guys going to do in-person events, you think? That's the $1 million question.
I think it's going to start in the second half of the year. We're going to see a lot of experimentation. You're going to see some regional differences too. There's going to be states like Florida that are going to be much more active with in-person events than, say, comparatively to New York or California. Just culturally, they're just different places. 22, I think, is going to be, a massive resurgence to face-to-face events.
Yeah, I think it really depends upon vaccine rollout and how conservative your company's policy is. Because in our company, if we aren't back in the office, we're not going to allow travel either, right? But, if you look at it in our environment, people who are the last in line to get the vaccine are probably going to have it before Memorial Day, at least if they're wanting to have it. So maybe that's midsummer, but Gartner, I think, is starting theirs in September. And I think it's going to be like dominoes. Once you start to see some major event vendors start to have it and have them successful, then others will follow.
It'll be really interesting to your point, Mark, in terms of, do you have to show your vaccine card? Or if not, do you have to have a negative test? Are they going to be taking your temperature on the way in? Are there not going to be 8 people around the table anymore? They're only going to be 4. I think, the air filtration systems, are venues going to have to invest in that don't have it already? I think there's a lot of interesting questions that are going to be presenting itself.
There are.
That's going to be like the next wave that we're all going to be like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, and the CDC guidance that came out this week is pretty much saying, and that's now, they've already adjusted it in less than 24 hours to make it a little bit more relaxed. So, my wife, who just got her second shot, is like, okay, I'm out. Let's go to a restaurant. Let's go. And I think more and more people are going to feel just that way, especially with the warm weather. Who wants to continue to stay in their home office for another year?
And I think a lot of what, at least I'm seeing for these sort of large industry events, is they're doing a hybrid model, which is, the majority of the content sessions will be virtual. However, there will be sort of a physical networking component to it. So that's interesting. But for us as a company, we will start doing our internal sort of workshops that we used to do, which was a small 20, 30 person physical workshops. And then probably towards the end of the year next year, we're going to look at doing larger events. But right now, I think, and what we see is people feel and will feel comfortable going to a 20, 30, 50 person event versus a 10,000 person event.
I think the one thing that's going to be interesting is before it was either virtual or physical. And if it was physical and we had like a virtual thing, they were kind of like the second class citizens. It was like when you go to church and you're in like the overflow room,
Very true.
I think now the virtual attendees and the virtual experience can no longer be the afterthought, right? It needs to be on par, if not better, almost than the physical. So that's going to be another one of the new challenges we have to, I think, work through, is the bimodal events.
It's going to happen. And I think the thing that's going to be in common to having a face-to-face and a digital virtual event at the same time is the content will be sort of the common denominator in terms of, presentations, whether it's live or virtual or recorded, panels, but the experiences are going to be different and the benefits are going to be different, whether it's a face-to-face audience or it's a virtual audience. For example, a virtual audience, they want efficient consumption of highly relevant content to be served up in a very good way. And then if you could also include some interactive experiences where they can connect with each other through roundtables or through polling or through chats, that's all really important to do as well for connection. But for face-to-face, it's going to be the actual experience. It's going to be that beautiful venue and that nice meal and, sitting down with people, networking. There will be obviously a content component, but what I don't think what we can do is try and market both experiences the same way. It's just going to be a lot more work for field marketers because it's not going to be an easy thing to do. There's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be, a lot of things to figure out. But I think the ROI is going to be higher because let's face it, it's all about breadth and extending the reach of the event and extending the life of the event. And then if you can do that face-to-face, if you can do that virtually, if you can do that digitally with the content and everything else, it definitely adds up to more ROI.
Yeah, we're actually doing a portfolio approach, looking ahead to second half as well as next year. Is that there will be some that would be face-to-face where it's appropriate. So as an example, like in Asia, they've actually already started to do some of that. And next year, I would like to see us doing really maybe certain ones are face-to-face, but the major ones, the tens of thousands of people ones would actually be virtual. because it's not only is it more efficient and effective, it's also very time saving for the attendees as well. So I'm curious what others are planning